So, are you DTFF?
Once again, here's Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football with your host, Jake Trowbridge and Dustin Lunt.
Welcome into another week of Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football. I'm your host, Jake Trowbridge. I am not joined by my co-host, Dustin Lunt, this time around, who is traveling out in Tennessee, taking some well-deserved vacation time. But no worries, because I have two fantastic guests here ready to help me out as we talk about the NFC East. We have two fans of the Philadelphia Eagles, no less, to help me talk about the NFC East. It feels appropriate. Welcome into Drew, DeLuca, and Joey Bankert. Gentlemen, welcome into the podcast.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. I love it. I don't believe we got to have an Eagles fan at all on last season to talk about this division. So having two feels like we're just kind of making up for it. So I feel good about that. But gentlemen, before we jump into the mix here, there's a couple of questions that I want to ask you. Now, obviously, we are the Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football podcast. So if you happen to be enjoying a beverage tonight, I want to know what that is. And I also want to know how you became a fan of the Eagles. So Joey, let's start with you. What are you drinking and how'd you become a fan?
All right, Jake. So in true Philly fashion, I'm just sporting a Yingling lager tonight. Nothing too crazy, but as a Philly fan, you can't go wrong with the Yingling. So that's what I'll be drinking tonight. As for how I became an Eagles fan, I've been a lifelong Philly sports fan. I grew up in the Bucks County area in Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philly, 45 minutes outside the city or so. So I grew up watching all of the teams, Philly, Sixers, Eagles, Flyers, now Union, and all these other teams popping up. I follow them all, and I now live in Maryland. So I've taken my Philly sports fandom down to the state of Maryland, and I'm trying to plant that around here and gather some more Eagles fans down here. So it's a work in progress. I'm outside of my comfort zone, but I'm making it work.
Trying to convert some Ravens fans here and there, maybe see if you can get them to jump ship. I think that's probably a tall order. Love the Yingling, by the way. I had a roommate after college who drank almost exclusively Yingling. Very hard to find in Wisconsin. He had to rely on a relative who would ship it out for him. So that's like gold in these parts, man. I love it. Drew, what are you enjoying and how did you become a fan of the Eagles?
All right. So I live in actually about 40 minutes the other way from Joey. I live in Delaware. So I live in the hometown University of Delaware, Joe Flacco Central. So you talk about the Ravens. So I actually married a Ravens fan and then she ended up converting of her own free will. It was not a condition of marriage. So, so it can't be done, Joey. Hang in there. So I'm enjoying a Utopia barrel-aged worldwide stout in true Delaware fashion. It's a Dogfish Head beer. It's fantastic, and it's a 2020 vintage, so something good did actually come out of 2020. It's this beer.
Nice, and that's it. That's the only thing, but I hope it tastes fantastic.
Yep.
I'm drinking tonight from a local Madison brewery here called Working Draft. It's a Mexican-style amber lager. It's a lot of descriptions altogether. I don't know what it tastes like, honestly. It just tastes like bread to me. But a really good bread. So I don't hate it too much. Gentlemen, before we hop into like the real nuts and bolts of this thing, and obviously we're going to be talking at length about the Eagles and we'll, deal with the other teams as we come across them. But before we do, we want to do our favorite segment of every show. It's the drunk trade of the week.
Drunk, hammered drunk.
Drunk trade of the week.
So, gents, this week, Reddit delivered, as they do, comes from Reddit user Grandma Balls. Never change, Reddit. Never, ever change. They say, I blew up one of my leagues when I drunk traded CMC, my first round pick, and something else. Literally just says something else. That wasn't me ignoring or throwing shade on it. They traded all that for T. Higgins and a ham sandwich. They say, I thought I was getting a first back. So that should give you an idea of how good they were feeling in the moment when they made this trade. Look, obviously, they lost the trade. I think we can all agree at least on that much, right? What I'm much more interested in with this one, though, guys, is have you experienced, from an outsider's perspective, a trade like this going down in any of your leagues? Or if not, what would be your immediate thought seeing something like this go down? Are you into vetoes at all? Because I feel like this is the type of trade that really tests that threshold. So, Drew, have you ever seen something like this go down in one of your leagues?
No. I have never seen anything like that. But I will say I have seen a drunk draft pick happen before, and this is many, many years ago. This is back when Ricky Williams was a prime first round draft pick. Someone was in an online draft. A bunch of us. Ricky Williams was drafted, and I guess a couple of picks before wasn't paying attention and drafted Ricky A. Williams later in the first round. The Indianapolis Colts fan. So that's the closest thing that I can remember. That was the first round draft pick of Ricky A. Williams, a rotational back from the Indianapolis Colts in the first round, which is also pretty pathetic.
So that's real hard. That's real hard to come back from. The closest I've seen to that is I know somebody wanted Deontay Johnson a couple of years back. They accidentally drafted Dearness Johnson. D. Johnson's got him. I don't understand that because ADP and all that should have separated, but it's not my place to judge. Joey, have you seen something like this go down in one of your leagues, and or what would your thought be if it did?
Oh man, I haven't seen it be done. I've seen offers that are pretty bad like this that do not get accepted. I've been offered trades not this bad, but similar, where people are asking for the world for like a sixth round draft pick, and just immediately, if you have common sense, you're going to be like, no, this is not happening in any world. So as far as this one, I mean, if you're going to veto something, I would just veto it, just because you got to go back to this person and say, are you sure you want to make this trade? Are you using your brain right now?
This type of trade is why breathalyzers on phones should be a real thing. I think that it would save a lot of people some heartache the next morning. I am curious here. Let's say we remove the first round pick. Let's throw it back on the other side where they meant for it to obviously be. CMC for T. Higgins in a first round pick. Just curious, which side do you fall on a dynasty league? Joey, would you rather have CMC or would you take T in a first?
In a dynasty league, I feel like that would definitely be a much better trade, just because the lifespan of a running back is not as long as that of a wide receiver, and T's coming up on a new contract, so he's still got a lot left in the tank. But it's CMC. He defies logic. So I would if I had to pick one side or the other, depending on what the rest of my roster looks like, if I was desperate for wide receivers, I might go T in the first. But if I'm looking good otherwise, I might want to keep CMC just because he's that good.
I respect it. Drew, CMC just had a birthday. I mean, he's hitting that age cliff hard, right? He's going to be toast by the time the season's over, from what I hear. But CMC or T. Higgins in a first for you?
Well, it just so happens that I'm also a Clemson Tigers fan. So I'm going to probably take the T. Higgins in the first side, especially if the ham sandwich is still part of the deal, as long as it's got, a nice piece of nice cheese, maybe some brown spicy mustard, and some lettuce and tomato might seal the deal. So I think I might take the T in the first.
Easily swayed. Remind me if I'm ever in a league with you. We're going to go out to dinner when we make these types of trades, and it's going to make things a lot easier. I do love T. Higgins. I'm also almost irrationally high on T. Higgins sometimes, so I might be tempted to go that way. it's just so hard to give up on somebody like
Yeah.
CMC. I put Travis
depends on
Kelce
the
in the
first.
same category.
Yeah, it really depends on the first. If it's a late first, I'm out. But if it's an early to mid first, I'm probably in. So
I like it. Well, enough of that terribleness that happened. Sorry, Grandma Balls. Not as damn that I have to read that name twice, but that's an uncomfortable spot. Let's move on to some more comforting talk. Let's talk about your Philadelphia Eagles. So we're going to go through team by team. We're going to start, of course, with Philly. We're going to talk about what happened over the offseason, some notable, in quotes, we always have to emphasize, notable losses, notable additions in what they did in the draft. So Eagles over the offseason, they lost Gardner Minshew, backup quarterback. They lost Miles Sanders. They lost Zach Pascal. They added Marcus Mariota, DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, Olamide Zaccheaus. I should learn how to pronounce that by now. He's been in the league for a while. And Dan Arnold. And then in the draft, pretty meager in terms of fantasy relevant players, but Tanner McKee added a quarterback in the 6th round as well. Look, I think the first question, maybe the most obvious question, when you're sitting in your draft, come redraft season, and you're looking at the first quarterback off of the board, is it now Jalen Hurts, or are you still defaulting to Pat Mahomes? Joey, if you're forced with it, feel free to utilize your homerism. I'm fine with that. But who would you take if you're going to go that route anyways for an early quarterback?
I mean, you said it right there from a homer's perspective, just because of how well Hurts did and the numbers he put up last year. It'd be hard for me to take Mahomes over him just because I would love to have Jalen Hurts on my fantasy team. To have one of your guys on your team is always something that's just a little icing on the cake for you. So if I had the 101, I would definitely take Jalen. I know a lot of people would say it's still got to be Patrick, but for a homer, I would take Jalen.
Hey, that's fair. And the weapon stayed. Oh, look at that. Drew is representing with the Jalen Hurts shirt. I respect that you had to go across the room to get that, by the way, for the visual aid. That was needed. That was great. But yeah, I mean, it's a real thing here where people are going to be deciding between this. Drew, for you, does it come down to the rushing upside, or is there something else there that you like as well?
Well, I mean, I think the rushing is a huge part of it. The floor is undeniable there with Hurts as far as you're looking at who the top echelon quarterbacks are. Hurts is in there. He's got by far the highest floor of anyone there. And I don't think we've even come close to seeing a ceiling, honestly. So what was the second year as a starter? He goes to Super Bowl. He has A.J. Brown has a career year with him, and he's just getting warmed up. Nobody wants to talk about Devontae Smith, but as an upper echelon receiver as well. But he in consecutive seasons set the Eagles records for a franchise that's been around for 90 years for most catches by a rookie wide receiver in a season, and then follow that up with his most catches by a wide receiver at any stage in their career last year. So no wide receivers caught more passes in a season than Devontae Smith has for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he's just getting warmed up too. So yeah, Olamide in there, Olamide Zaccheaus from LSU guy. We'll still allow it, but yeah, I think he's a solid receiver. He's a solid NFL receiver. I think he's pushing Quez. There's been a lot of positive buzz in camp about Quez Watkins this year. Finally taking that step. He grew praise from in back-to-back days from his head coach Nick Sirianni, and then from Jalen Hurts. So there's a little bit of a drumbeat kind of drumming up about Watkins. Finally taking a step as a third receiver. Now, we heard a similar drumbeat last year in training camp about Jalen Hurts taking a step as a passer, because this time last year, the book on Hurts was, well, he's not a good deep ball thrower. He had, and then we heard a lot of noise coming out of camp, pretty unequivocally that he had definitely taken major strides in his deep ball accuracy and just his all-around game in general. So Reuben Frank, who is a reporter I respect in Philadelphia, was among those, and Reuben Frank isn't he straight. So when he says it, I'm listening. So I want to hear more about it, but I'm intrigued to see where that's going. And of course, Goddard is there. Swift is a better receiving back than they've had in a very, very long time. He's just got so many weapons. I'm super, super excited for Jalen Hurts. Like I said, I think he's got the highest floor of any upper echelon quarterback, and like I said, I think that ceiling is there too. So he's the rushing touchdowns with the tush push. you can count on like at least 8 to 10 of those minimally. So for me, it's an easy one-on-one smash for me for Hurts.
I love it. And of course, we're talking about what the weapons that he has there are. And you mentioned it, Jalen Hurts taking a massive step last year in terms of being a passer. And it was talked about early on in training camp. A lot of the times we have to kind of pick and choose which training camp blurbs we actually follow and believe. And obviously that paid off. So as you're saying now, if there's a possibility of a third guy stepping up for wide receivers, because it was the Brown and it was the Smith show, and that was it. So Goddard, of course, still did reasonably well as a tight end. Could be a steal maybe in this draft. Who knows? But let's talk about A.J. Brown. Let's talk about Devontae Smith. Now, those two guys, we've mentioned on this podcast often how pairs of wide receivers, people get scared off sometimes, and I understand why, but every year there is at least 4 to 6 pairs of wide receivers who finished as top 24 wide receivers by the end of the fantasy season. So A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, what are your thoughts on drafting potentially both of them? This isn't something that people are obviously comfortable with all of the time, but they're such elite level talents. Joey, what do you think about pairing these guys together on some of your rosters? Is that something you're interested in?
Absolutely. I would definitely pair them together. I'm actually in a dynasty league where I have both of them. I had AJ Brown, and then when Devontae Smith came in the draft, I picked him up, and then the trade happened and they became teammates. And I've won that league 3 years in a row. So it hasn't hurt me. So I think they're a lot closer together in where I would draft them than a lot of boards have them. I mean, I've done quite a few mock drafts so far for the Scott Fish Bowl and other mock drafts, and there's a little bit of a gap where AJ Brown's more of a second round pick or so, and then Smith might go third or fourth. But I feel like if you end up getting Smith ahead of Brown or Brown ahead of Smith, they're going to be right there together. Come by the end of the year, they're going to have over 1,000 yards, 8 to 12 touchdowns each easily. I could see that.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where I'm always comfortable waiting a little bit and taking the second guy because it's such a small discrepancy to me. Drew, Devontae Smith, you mentioned him. What's a realistic expectation, do you think, this year for him? Is there a chance that he sneaks into, let's say, the top 8 wide receivers when this whole thing's said and done for the fantasy season?
I don't think it's his most reasonable range of outcomes, but I think it's possible. I think it's definitely possible for him to finish as a wide receiver 1 for sure. Like we talked about him just getting warmed up, and he's just second year raised the bar from the first, and like he's in an elite offense with an elite talent quarterback. And AJ Brown drawing all kinds of attention on the other side. I wouldn't put it past him to finish as a wide receiver 1 for sure. A top 8, I think, might be a little bit hard to do, but he's going in many cases in the second round of a lot of best ball drafts that I'm in. So it's very hard to get that AJ Brown, Hurts, and Smith stack. So you can get usually Hurts and Brown, or Brown and Hurts, usually in that order. But Smith's usually not there when you go to pick in the third round. He's usually gone by then. So if I think the fantasy community in general is kind of well aware of Smith and his upside, and you think he's being drafted accordingly there.
Yeah, and you got my hopes up here. So these two guys, of course, yeah, I'm in on both of these guys, and I probably might even have higher expectations for Smith than a lot of people do. But I am very curious outside of these two because they are so dominant. You mentioned Quez Watkins potentially taking a step. I was so overweight on Quez Watkins in best ball drafts last year. I was taking him in the last 2 rounds, every single draft pretty much. And now there's the possibility still that it's him or somebody else, like you said. Zacchaeus could come in. Zacchaeus? Correct me once and for all.
I think it's Zacchaeus, yeah.
Zacchaeus. Oh, Olamide Zacchaeus. Yep.
I'm only going to ask you that 10 to 15 more times throughout this podcast, I promise. But there could be another guy right outside of them. I do want to talk about the other pass-catching options. So they add Swift. They add, I know he's not known as a pass catcher, but they do add Rashad Penny to the mix in the backfield as well. So outside of the 2 wide receivers, What's the game plan with these other guys? I mean, Jalen Hurts, I think people are worried about how much he cuts into his own backfield's rushing production. And then we're worried about what the target share is for other pass catchers. Joey, is there anybody that sticks out that you think is going to end up being a value in drafts because of the way people are judging them right now?
As far as the running backs are concerned, I'm almost more afraid of taking them as far as Swift and Penny go, just because the Eagles rotate their backs so often. We have Swift, we have Penny, and then we still have Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott. So the one thing I'll tell you is if you are doing a week by week fantasy league or anything, and it's Eagles Giants, pick up Boston Scott. He's gonna score at least 1 or 2 touchdowns against the Giants every time. So you can count on that. But the rest of the backfield, they have a lot of talent there, and they like to rotate them. So I'm almost more afraid of taking them. But I was also afraid of taking Miles Sanders last year, and he had the best year of his career, and now he signed a big deal with Carolina. So take my words with a grain of salt. But I think Goddard's going to come out with the best year out of the non-Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown crowd. I think Goddard's going to have a great year, and he'll be a good pickup for anyone on their fantasy team.
Yeah, I love that. And I've been trying to get Goddard in dynasty leagues right now just because I feel like his value is kind of weirdly suppressed. You know, this was a team just a couple short years ago who was supporting 2 quality tight ends. You know, Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert both had some fantasy value. Drew, is there a world where you think that he's, I guess, a quality buy right now in your dynasty leagues? Or is he somebody that's going to be a middle round target for you come redraft?
I think he's a fair buy. I mean, I wouldn't, sell the farm for him or anything like that because he's 28 years old now. So I think he's entering his peak right now. So you got a few years, I think, of him at his peak, which is kind of what you want in dynasty. You want like a 3-year window is what you're shooting for. So yeah, I think he's a solid buy. I think if a lot of people are who the person who has him is a little afraid of AJ Brown and the addition of Swift and things like that. I think he's a good target. Joe, you mentioned the Eagles rotate their backs. I'll also add that rushing quarterbacks in general, there's been a lot of studies on this, a lot of data on this, that they generally don't dump off to the running back as much as your pure pocket passers do, and Hurts has been pretty true to form on that. So will that change with a talent like Swift, who is by far and away a better receiver than Sanders, perhaps? So I do think we'll find Swift probably even more, even in the slot, perhaps from time to time as well, maybe in 4 receiver sets. I think they're going to get creative and use him a little differently. But yeah, for Goddard though, I think he's going to eat. He's going to get his. He's going to be a tight end 1. He may not be the tight end 1, but he's going to be your, in your top 5 to 7 tight ends, I think, every year, and you could take that to the bank. So if that's a weakness for you and you have the capital to move him, whether it's players, picks, when you're not giving up too much to do it, I would absolutely do it. I think he's going to be as stable a pick as you can get at the tight end position in Dynasty. And as far as a redraft middle round target, sure, I'm there. I kind of feel like he's got a higher floor than Pitts. I think they're going around the same area. So it's just a matter of, do you feel like swinging for the home run in Pitts, or do you kind of want that solid, steady floor of a set it and forget it tight end and knowing what you're getting out of the guy? So that's kind of how I see that there.
Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned with Kyle Pitts, look, nothing against Kyle Pitts. I love you, Kyle Pitts, but damn it, stop hurting me so much. And it's so hard to put your heart back out there for somebody like that. Whereas Dallas Goedert has been so consistent, and yet he's maybe not as flashy as some of these other names out there. And that's why I think his value is going to stay where it is, especially for redraft purposes. But look, if you're trying to sell me on somebody like Dalton Kincaid a couple of rounds later or Dallas Goedert, I'm going to reach early and take Dallas Goedert. So lastly here, we're talking about Swift and Penny, right? I just wonder, there's a lot of injuries that people are worried about with both of these guys, with both Swift and Penny. I'm not a fan of the phrase injury prone, but what do we think the actual utilization? I know we've hinted at it here, but what's the real split look like between Hurts, Swift, and Penny? Is there a workhorse aspect truly to any of the rushing production, or is it going to be a carousel? Joey, what do you think there?
Yeah, so I think it'll be a carousel. I don't think you're going to see 10 carries for all three of them week after week. I think it'll vary week to week depending on the matchups. I think Penny's more of a downhill runner. He can go through the trenches and make pop off those big runs, and Swift is more of a finesse runner. So it'll depend on what defense they're going up against. Swift might have a week where he has uh, 12 to 18 carries, and Penny only has 8, 5 to 10, and then the next week it'll be the other. But I think Hurts will have a consistent 10 or so, 8 to 10 carries a game, if I had to say. But yeah, I think it'll vary week to week, so you won't have one of them be a steady workhorse. I think they're gonna rotate them.
And Drew, I know
Try
you
to keep
hinted
them
at it
fresh.
as well. Yeah, right. Freshness. It's important. It really is. And Drew, you kind of hinted at this as well. But is that the feeling? Do you feel like any of them are really going to be leaned into to be kind of a workhorse type here?
No, I think Joey's pretty much got the right read there for the most part. But I will say this: it would not surprise me to see Penny and or Swift both have a couple of a 20 carry game here and there. I think Penny really profiles well into the role that Sanders had last year. The only problem is that I think Swift is by far and away the better talent, and I think he adds things to the offense, especially if you're in PPR. I'd rather have Swift. So I know their ADPs are drastically different. So Swift is going around like pick 76, and Penny's somewhere between 111 and 114, right? So if I'm looking at that, obviously I think the smart take is that you want Penny, you want to get that draft capital value there. But the only caveat I have to that is that the Eagles are paying Penny next to nothing. So I think it's like $1 million plus, maybe $1 million and change. And they can walk away from if something happens in camp or they're just not impressed or he gets hurt, something happens, they can pretty much just cut him if they needed to and walk away from that and still be pretty comfortable with the running back room that they have. So they're not going to do that if something happens with Swift. I think Swift gets a little bit of a longer leash for that perspective. He's also a Philly guy. I think a lot of people in the fan base are excited to have a Philly guy coming home, which we talked about Kyle Pitts. Frankly, he's a Philly guy too, but he's not with us. So heck with him. So I think kind of like the unpopular take here is that I have more confidence really in Swift hitting a ceiling than I do Penny. But I think that's baked into his price. So Swift is a guy where I love the ceiling in this offense and what he can potentially do. If he falls, I'll take him a round or so beyond where he is. But I'm not going to wait too long to take him. And I also like Penny the same way. Penny's also a value in that perspective. But you have to understand, I think the floor with Penny, I think, is lower than we think it is. But that's also, I think, baked in fairly into his ADP.
Yeah, there's a pretty big gap there. I'm typically more of the wait and see guy when it comes to anything that could even be perceived as a committee for backfield. So I'll probably do some Penny, but you made a great point. They're not very committed to him, which is probably all the more reason to keep a guy like Kenny Gainwell in the peripheral here. Keep him in the back of your mind just in case, like you said, something happens there with Penny.
Well, he also knows the offense, and the other two are just coming in off the street. So there's something to be said for that, especially early in the season. If you're in a DFS, Kenny Gainwell's a guy. He's probably going to be a value. He might be a guy I might be looking to play that's going to do a studs and scrubs kind of thing. If Gainwell's priced down with the scrubs, I'm all over that, and then stacking my lineup other places. So for sure, there'll be some value there with Gainwell from time to time as well.
Love it. Well, hey, before we move on from the Eagles, I want to give you both right of first refusal. Anything else that you'd like to mention about your team, please, by all means, this is your opportunity.
I'm just excited for them to go out and do it again. So it's been a long time since the team has gone to Super Bowl, lost, and run it back. And I get the vibe that this team is just committed to doing everything it can to get back. So they've done so much to build on the defensive side of the football. We always talk about offense on this, in fantasy circles, but they've done so much on the defensive side this year. And I'm just excited for the season. I think they repeat as the NFC champs would be the first time that's happened in well over a decade, I think, in the NFC East. And to me, they're the odds-on favorite to go back to the Super Bowl from the NFC. I think they're a very strong team. And Joey is an Eagles fan. We've suffered through a lot of lean years where we've had a lot, there's been a lot of years like, man, I just hope they can just have a winning record, or I hope they just beat the Cowboys, but this expectations are high. The buzz is still strong. This team, the city is in the area is behind the Eagles 100%. And we're super, super excited for what's ahead.
Still, one of the greatest feelings has to be beating the Cowboys, though, regardless. I mean, I would still say, even if you win a Super Bowl, that's got to be like second on the list, probably, beating the Cowboys. Joey, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Drew completely. I'm super excited about our defense. I was going to point that out as well. I mean, our Georgia Bulldog defense, at this point, we got Nolan Smith, Jalen Carter going to fortify that defensive line. Nakobe Dean's going to take over a lot of snaps in the linebacker position. And we got a new defensive coordinator. I know a lot of Eagles fans weren't happy with Jonathan Gannon, and we're happy to see him gone. And I'm excited about the new energy that Desai's bringing as the new defensive coordinator. So watch out for that Eagles defense. It's gonna be different, and I think that's what they needed in that Super Bowl loss. We gave up too many. We didn't get enough stops, and I think this defense will be ready to get those stops that we need. So super excited. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, and they also brought back Slay and Bradbury too. So I was actually able to cover. I was actually able to cover the Super Bowl for Super Bowl week anyway. I was actually in the press conference, the last Eagles press conference before the Super Bowl, and then I had a chance to ask Jalen Hurts. I said, who can you credit really on the other side of the ball with helping you raise your game? And he pointed out Slay and Bradbury unequivocally. They battle the receivers so well, he said, and they make it just harder on him and make him raise his game. And so him bringing back Slay and Bradbury not only lifts the defense, but also it sharpens Jalen Hurts. Makes him even better as well. So I'm super excited for that as well.
Well, I'm excited for you both. As a Packers fan, I'm basically taking the year off from expectations, as I talked about with Joey ahead of the podcast. So, you know what? Enjoy your Super Bowl. I'm willing to let this year go as long as it, doesn't go back to the Chiefs. Let's just be honest. That's just me loving underdogs more than anything. Nothing necessarily against the Chiefs. Although Travis Kelce's kind of a douche. I will put that out there. All right, let's move on to the New York Giants here. Let's talk about the villains, maybe not the villains, but a villain in the division. So notable losses this offseason: Richie James, Kenny Golladay. Again, big quotes around notable there. Notable additions: Darren Waller, Paris Campbell, Jameson Crowder, Jeff Smith. They just want all of the receivers, all of the slot receivers especially. They added in the draft, 3rd round. What else? Wide receiver Jalen Hyatt. In the 5th round, they added Eric Gray, a running back. So news going on the last couple of days. Saquon Barkley, is he gonna sign his tag? Is he gonna hold out here? There's an interview just today. He talked about there's a date that he has in mind, and they'll try to come to the table and get this thing figured out. Is there any at this point? Let's say you're doing an early draft, or let's say you're trying to, in Dynasty, secure your running back room. Are you using this news for anything, or is this just white noise to you? Drew, what do you think about this?
I mean, I'll listen, but I'm not overly concerned just yet. I think it's easy to say one thing. It's a lot harder to do one thing, to leave that kind of money on the table. So he's getting franchise tag money this year. I know he's angry about getting a franchise tag, but he's probably getting, a good chunk of change to play football this year. So, but if he does hold out and that does last in a training camp, then I'll sit up and listen. So otherwise for me, it's wheels up on a top 3 running back this year. So the only thing I might do differently is if I'm trying to decide between him and, say, Jonathan Taylor, I might go Taylor instead of Barkley. But if Taylor's gone and Barkley's still there and I want a running back, I'm taking Barkley.
Yeah, and this, calls to order a few years back where all the running back, not issues, but holdouts certainly kind of started to ramp up, was with Le'Veon Bell. And we saw how that happened with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Lev Bell was very serious, deadly serious, did not play for the Steelers, ended up going to the Jets the following season. And we saw James Conner come to fruition out of that. Joey, worst case scenario, Saquon Barkley, it's for real. He's going to hold out. What would you even begin to do with this backfield? Is there anybody behind him that would jump out to you?
Oh man, No, I can't even remember who their backup is at this point. Is it still the Clemson, the guy from out of
No, Matt,
Clemson,
no,
or
no, he's gone. It's
he's gone?
Matt
Breda's
Breda
gone.
and also,
Breda.
yeah, Breda's there, and they drafted Eric Gray also as well, running
Oh,
back.
Gray,
So
yes.
he might get a look, but no one that's super inspiring, I don't think, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
not at all. I would of the two, I would definitely go Gray just because he's the rookie and might have more upside. You know what Breda is at this point, but if it's no Saquon there, then it's pretty much nobody. You'll be relying on Danny Dimes to do a whole heck of a lot if there's no Saquon there.
Maybe he adds some scoot to his resume this season. Maybe he picks up some extra rushing yards. Who knows? That is kind of an underrated aspect with Danny Dimes. Before we talk about him, though, I did want to call out like there's nobody in competition in that backfield. It's one of the few backfields where there isn't that. That just speaks to how highly I think Saquon probably should be drafted and valued in fantasy circles, and he is. Now that he's kind of over the injury hump a little bit. Wide receivers, totally different story. This is a mix. They brought back everybody basically that was on the roster last year, and they did that early. And that to me signaled they're done adding to the position. They're just going to re-sign their guys, and that's that. Instead, they continue on the spree, adding what I would call cheap depth, right? And then picking some guys up in the draft as well with Jalen Hyatt. So, Joey, help me make heads or tails out of this goddamn wide receiver depth chart. Does anybody jump off the page there as sort of a 1 or 1A at the top?
I don't see a 1 or 1A. I think Wan'Dale Robinson's going to do more this year. I think he was plagued with injuries last year, so he didn't get enough time to really show what he can do. And then Hyatt is another pickup for this year. I think he'll be interesting to watch. I just don't see Slayton or whoever their other number two guy that does most
Sterling
of their
Shepard.
work. Shepard, yeah,
Yeah.
Shepard and Slayton. They seem to usually do decent against Philly, but other than that, they don't provide that 1A or 2 look that can carry a team for a whole year. So I don't see anyone out of the wide receiver room being someone you can look to as your wide receiver 1 or even your wide receiver 2 on your fantasy team. But I did like the pickup of Darren Waller. If he stays healthy, I think he's going to be Danny Dimes' favorite target.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like he's the 1A in wide receiver land, even though he's a tight end, but we've seen how he's been utilized previously, and it's very reminiscent of a wide receiver. So, Drew, for you, is it kind of Darren Waller as the guy and everybody else far behind, or is there somebody that's inching up to him?
I think that's the game plan. I think obviously you bring in a guy like Darren Waller, you kind of want him to be the central point of your offense. Him and Barkley obviously out of the backfield. That's certainly how it looks on paper. I do worry about Waller getting up there in age a little bit. I worry about his injury history. I hope he can stay healthy for Giants fans. As an Eagles fan, I hope he doesn't, but no ill will on him though. But I think you pointed out Wan'Dale. I think that's a good candidate for, he started really kind of flashing some things before he went down with injury last year. He had a couple of good games there. I think he gave a little taste of what could be. So I think he's a target potentially. I am also not really that enamored with Slayton or Shepard. Hyatt is mildly interesting to me. Hodgins is kind of a low ceiling, high floor kind of option because he should start on the outside. He should have a pretty high snap share. So he's someone to keep an eye on. He was drafted by Brian DeBole in Buffalo in that regime there, and then he brought him over to the Giants. So he's quite familiar with the offense, and he's somebody that he can kind of lean on, rely on. But I don't think he's got the prospect profile. But I want to point out Paris Campbell. I'll put him out there. His big knock all his professional career has been inability to stay healthy. So if he is healthy, he definitely has that prospect profile. If he's able to kind of recapture his kind of peak form, that he could potentially play the role of a de facto wide receiver 1. And especially in the slot, they let go of Richie James. It's potential, in a perfect scenario, Campbell could be a sneaky ad. So his ADP now is like 200 plus. So he's kind of like a best ball target right now for me in late rounds. I got more than my fair share of Paris Campbell late in best ball. So I think that he's one to watch. I think Wandale, like you said, and then Waller, I think are the ones that are to me the most interesting with an eye on Jalen White as well.
Yeah, this feels like a group.
Jalen Hyatt, sorry.
Yeah, you've got to pick your guy, and you've got to stick to your guns here and just say, look, if I'm going to take somebody at the end of my draft, this is who I'm going to have some convictions about it. Or you can throw a dart throw too, I suppose. I did see Paris Campbell already getting the hype coming out here. We should expect a healthy dose of that, I think, leading up to the season. Hopefully that doesn't push his ADP up too high. I think Hyatt right now, at least in the best balls that I've been in, he seems to be the guy who's at the top of the list. I think that's just the freshness of it. Personally, I don't know that it's necessarily vindicated just yet, but who am I? I'm not a Giants fan. I don't know these things. But Daniel Jones, as we wrap up the Giants here, I think that he did overperform, definitely in a lot of people's eyes for fantasy last season. I think his real life stats were not the most impressive, but certainly more than what people had expected out of him. What do we think this year? What's the real expectation for Daniel Jones? Is it another step forward, or does he kind of regress to where he was the first couple of years? Drew, what do you think on that one?
Well, I think it's a tall order for him to kind of take another step forward without a true wide receiver one. They thought they had that with Devontae Smith before the Eagles leapfrogged and drafted him. Sorry, Giants fans, but but I will say this: if Paris Campbell or somebody does take a step up as an act as a wide receiver one, and Waller does stay healthy, it's possible. But the problem is that it's whole lot of ifs, a whole lot of if I have to count on more than one if for a situation, then my degree of confidence definitely drops. So I like him as a if you don't go quarterback early and he's still there, I think the rushing kind of gives him a nice floor from a fantasy perspective. So he's worthwhile in that scenario where you don't grab a top quarterback and you take a swing on Daniel Jones, knowing that you at least have a solid floor as a borderline QB1, high end QB2. And then, if he does hit, then you're in a great spot because that rushing floor is really going to elevate him.
Yeah. He kind of seems in that Kirk Cousins-esque tier of quarterback right now in terms of where you draft him. Joey, is this somebody that you're interested in? Do you see a progression possible for him?
I don't see a progression necessarily just because they did bring in Waller, like we said, so that's the better target than he had all of last year. But they didn't make any notable improvements in the wide receiver room. Besides Campbell, he's a slight upgrade, I guess, but not a big enough upgrade. Like the Eagles went out and they brought in A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts took off. They didn't make a move like that. So I don't see Daniel Jones making an extreme progression like Jalen Hurts did. I think you might see him have a similar year to last year. Like Drew was pointing out, his rushing ability he's a sneaky rusher. He can run pretty good. He'll pick up some first downs with his legs, score a couple rushing touchdowns too. So he's a good, like Drew was saying, QB2, low floor QB1. So I might pick him up if I need a QB2 in a super flex league. I would be happy with him as my second quarterback to start there. But I wouldn't necessarily be trying to grab him as my sole quarterback in one QB leagues.
I think that's completely fair. You can add as many mid to low tier wide receivers as you want, Giants. It's not going to make him jump out all of a sudden. By the way, I don't think they should be done. I think they should just throw any other straggler free agents into the mix. Jarvis Landry, welcome aboard, buddy. Just keep adding to that pile and see what happens.
Well, they did it with Jamison Crowder. He's a name to throw. That was just we're not even talking about Jamison Crowder. They brought him in too. So I just kind of feel like they're just kind of seeing what they have and whatever sticks. Just kind of what's going on with the Giants. So
yeah, I can't wait to see the amount of cuts that happen right before the season from this group. Yeah. It's going to be a massacre. Speaking of massacres, let's talk about the Washington Commanders. We have to. We're forced to. Over the offseason, Matthew Berry would not like me saying that, by the way. But they did lose over the offseason. They lost Cam Sims, Taylor Heineke, Carson Wentz, obviously, J.D. McKissick.
They lost him. Yes.
They lost him. He is not
Huge
there,
loss.
I should say. Notable additions: Jacoby Brissett, draft pick, 6th round, Chris Rodriguez Jr., a running back. Look, I think honestly we do have to start here. It is pretty prescient. The quarterback situation, it's an interesting one, as it is year over year in Washington. We never know exactly what's going to come out of it. High hopes last year, a lot of people had for Carson Wentz. Taylor Heineke kind of did Taylor Heineke things. He's serviceable when we're talking about fantasy sometimes. But now Jacoby Brissett, I think, is very interesting. So I do want to get your thoughts on Jacoby Brissett versus the incumbent sophomore Sam Howell. You know, Brissett looked pretty good in relief of Deshaun Watson for the first 10, 11 games last year for the Browns, right? It performed better, certainly, than Deshaun Watson did with the Browns. So is there a world where Jacoby worms his way into the starting position, or is it the Sam Howell show? Joey, who do you have with the leg up here?
I think they're going to start with Sam Howell, just because I feel like they see themselves being as the vast underdog in the division to start the year. I don't think they have a reason to say we gotta win, so we're going to put Brissett in, because I think Brissett is their best option to win games at this point, just because he's an established quarterback in the league and he's shown that he can win some games. But they drafted Sam Howell. They didn't draft anybody this year, so they got to give him his looks. So I think it's Sam Howell to start, see what he's got. If they find themselves in a position to win because of him, great. Keep Sam Howell in and let him do his thing. But if you realize that Sam Howell's not your guy, you have Brissett, you can bring him in and provide some stability. But I have family who are Washington fans, and they're obviously going through some stuff right now, but I think it's going to be the Sam Howell show to start. But as far as fantasy is concerned, I wouldn't touch him.
Yeah, Drew, what do you think there? One versus one, but does either of those guys matter to you in fantasy?
Well, I kind of think I think Joey, you have the right idea on Sam Howell and Brissett there. I think Brissett's kind of the kill switch. So I think if something goes off the rails with Sam Howell, they'll put Brissett in just for the sake of not torturing the fan base any further, because they've already been through a lot in the last couple of decades. So I kind of feel like he's also a good mentor, frankly, for Howell. I think he's a similar kind of play style, in that Howell's a lot more mobile than we give him credit for, and he's got a much bigger arm than Brissett does, though. So I think he's a great kind of a guide on the side, if you will, for Howell and his development. So I think it was a pretty smart ad by the Washington Commanders to bring Brissett in. So I don't think he's a true threat to Howell. So if I'm drafting and it's a super flex league, I'm interested in Howell as a low end QB2, high end QB3 with upside for much more. Frankly, I'm actually really high on the wide receivers they have there. McLaurin's very good. I really like Jahan Dotson a lot. So if they get one other person that somehow manages to step up and makes it a triumvirate, I mean, Sam Howell could really do well. So we're talking about a guy who was the QB1 on a lot of scouts' boards for the 2022 NFL draft. He slipped very, very far, as we all know, but there were scouts that had him above Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett. I think, was it PFF? I think was one of the ones that had him as their QB1. And the year before that, in 2021, if you're into Devy at all, he was pretty much widely regarded as one of, if not the best quarterbacks in that draft. And he was thought to be, a potential 101 in Superflex leagues the following year, which of course didn't happen. So he lost a lot of talent to the NFL. Michael Carter was among those. I can't remember, names escape me right now. Wide receiver, De'Ami Brown actually went as well from there to Washington. So he lost a lot of talent along on the offense side of the ball, a lot of skill position weapons. But he still, was very, very productive with his legs. So I think he's another sneaky one to watch. I think he's a good late round. Why not take a flyer, especially in Superflex leagues, because he does have that rushing floor that we don't really recognize or know about. So I am interested in how, in that capacity where he's going right now. In best ball, he's going around like pick 180-ish. Sure, why not? Especially if you're able to pair him up with McLaurin, Dotson, or even both. That could really pay off, especially in the tournament. So,
That does seem like a guy that you should probably be targeting in Dynasty now instead of waiting. Like that's a
Yes.
guy, if you're going to go after him, don't wait on somebody like Sam Howell. You should be making those steps now before we really see what he has, because you're getting him at basement level sort of prices there. Now, talking about the wide receivers, yeah, obviously the two names that are at the top of that list, we're talking Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson. There are some other guys there. You mentioned Dynamic Brown, Curtis Samuel still lingering around. There are options, right, outside of the two main guys. I personally have always been historically pretty low on Washington wide receivers. I've just never had the confidence level there. Joey, out of, let's say, the two top dogs, at least for right now, McLaurin and Dotson, there's a big gap in their ADP. There's going to be rounds of difference here. Terry McLaurin's going to be, certainly a top 20 guy, if not inching up a little bit more, whereas Jahan Dotson's going to be more of a mid to late round target. At ADP, do you have a preference for one of these guys?
Yeah, I would still prefer McLaurin just because I think he's the best talent in that room by a pretty good margin. I think Dotson's pretty good. I like him out of Penn State. Dotson is a good receiver, and he showed that he can put up some numbers last year. He had a couple of good games, and he'll do well for, I would especially say, best ball, just because anyone besides McLaurin is going to be better set off for a best ball league, in my opinion, just because they're going to have weeks where they do really well, and then they'll have weeks where they don't produce much at all. But McLaurin's more of that stable receiver that for them that's going to be there week after week, and I feel like Hal will make him better than he has been. They haven't had a stable quarterback to really show what McLaurin can do, and I think hopefully Hal can do it for them. I think that's what McLaurin's hoping for. He wants the ball, and hopefully Hal can get it to him. I would still take McLaurin as number one out of that.
Terry McLaurin, man. I don't know if anybody actually knows what Terry McLaurin's ceiling is. I don't know if Terry McLaurin knows what Terry McLaurin's ceiling is right now, because he's just had to suffer through such terrible quarterback play. I do feel bad for the guy. Drew, do you have the strong vibes of, look, if you're in the draft, you got to pick between one of these two guys? Because to me, it reads a little bit like a Deontay Johnson, George Pickens type of scenario. But do you have a preference for one of them at ADP, given where they are now?
Yes. I absolutely do, and sorry, Joey, it's Dotson for me. We're at odds finally, where I think we're like mind on most things.
It was too nice in this podcast.
Yeah.
So
fair.
100% Dotson for me at ADP. So I like McLaurin. I think you hit all the reasons why I like him. They're all valid reasons. But you look at Dotson, they took the training wheels off right around week 13. So they decided to get him involved in the offense more. I'm reading his target shares. Week 13 against the Giants, 22%. Then at bye week, and then against the Giants, 21%. Then against San Francisco, 26%. Then against Cleveland Browns, 25%. Then against the Dallas Cowboys, closed out with 21%. So there were two games in that stretch where McLaurin did not eclipse 20%. He was 15 and 18 against the San Fran and Cleveland. So you're looking at a 1 and 1A situation here with both of these guys. So we talked at the top of the show about Brown and Smith for the Eagles being pretty close. I think these guys should be a lot closer than what their ADPs are. So for me, I think Dotson is an absolute screaming buy and a steal right now. I'm all over him. I'm trying to get him at Dynasty if I can, and I'm all over him in redraft at ADP. And I have more best ball shares of Dotson than I care to admit right now.
Damn. Well, I got to re-examine my portfolio here after that with Dotson. And look, I mean, the guy was a touchdown magnet, it felt like, for certain games last year for them. And it feels like he has that ability again this year. What I'm less comfortable with, even with, and by the way, I should say, Curtis Samuel, I miss you. Come back to fantasy relevance. I don't think it's going to happen this year. I am pretty uncomfortable with this backfield, though, but we do have to try to sort this out, at least give it a whirl, because talking about close proximity and ADP, Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson are basically back-to-back, certainly in every best ball that I've been in. And I don't know. Every year, Antonio Gibson is talked up for his pass-catching chops. But do we get to see the chops play out in real time on the field this year? Brian Robinson, for his part, was fantastic coming back from a gunshot issue and looking great afterwards. So, Joey, if you got to pick one of these guys, is it going to be Robinson or Gibson, both going close together in ADP?
So I'm going to say Robinson because for the past few years, I've been trying to get Gibson going, and it hasn't worked. I'm going to take my losses and not believe in Gibson anymore, and I feel like Robinson's the way to go. I think he's just a little bit better overall, and I think it's his time to take over as the lead there. And I'm not buying the hype on Gibson until he proves me otherwise, because I've been bitten by him too much. So I got to go Robinson this year.
You're not trusting Ron Rivera's random asides. Man, this was the man behind CMC, don't you know? I'm so sick of people talking about Ron Rivera and CMC and Antonio Gibson, by the way. Drew, if you're picking one of these guys, who are you leaning toward?
Whoever falls the farthest, basically. I don't have a lot of degree of confidence in either one of them. So I think if I'm in a standard league or half PPR, it's Robinson. If I'm in PPR, full PPR, it's probably Gibson for me. But it's not, it's not a pick that I'm like saying, beating the table for like I was for Dotson a few minutes ago. So the only hope I have for Gibson is that maybe Rivera kind of maybe sees, hey, you know what, maybe we should explore, adding that element to our offense, maybe as him at the backfield as an explosive option. Maybe that adds something to our offense. Maybe he'll finally willing to give it a try. But I kind of feel like he showed his hand last year where he kind of anointed Robinson as the guy. The guy gets shot and comes back, and then he's immediately featured in the offense. So, I mean, actions speak louder than words, as I've been told ever since I was a young child. So, I kind of, if I had it in a vacuum, had to pick one, it's probably Robinson. I just tantalized by that upside with Gibson at that point in the draft of, you're kind of taking throwing a dart at either one of them. So I'm not going to really fault anybody either way. I think Robinson obviously has the higher floor. Gibson for me has the higher ceiling. So it's just a matter of what do I need, and am I looking for depth at the running back position, or am I looking for a potential difference maker because I loaded up at other positions? So it's just a matter of the roster build at that point for me.
I like that. And in a redraft, it's an easy decision to be able to assess because they are going so late in the draft. So you'll be able to configure that as you get to those decisions. Would you look at that? We ran out of time. We can't talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Oh, guys.
Oh, darn.
No. We will talk about them here briefly. So notable losses for the Dallas Cowboys over the offseason. Dalton Schultz, lead tight end. Noah Brown. Zeke Elliott, obviously. T.Y. Hilton. They added Ronald Jones. That's pretty much it. Draft picks, the second round, Luke Schoonmaker. I don't know. He's a tight end. In the sixth round, they added Deuce Vaughn, running back. And in the seventh, they added Jalen Brooks, wide receiver. I did not mention, because my thing did not update, Brandon Cooks. And now I feel so bad for leaving Brandon Cooks. I've been the biggest Brandon Cooks stan, and I left him off of the additions. I'm an ass. Let's talk about Dak Prescott, though. Is this guy, for fantasy, at least, kind of the new Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins-y type of value quarterback? Or are we just not really interested in what he produces? Joey, when it comes to your drafts and you're thinking about quarterbacks, is he on your radar or somebody you're going after?
So from a fan of Eagles football standpoint, I try to avoid Cowboys like the plague when it comes to fantasy football. I've found myself taking them on occasion, but it's very rare. But I have to put that aside and try to be smart when it comes to some of my leagues. So as far as Dak is concerned, I will take him. So for like a super flex league, I'd like to have. I would see him as a good addition as a QB, even a QB1 or a QB2 in there. But as long as I'm building up in a running back or wide receiver position first, I wouldn't be happy taking Dak in the first round for sure. But I think he's a stable quarterback, like you said. He'll give up those. He'll get those Kirk Cousins type points. I think his interceptions will come down from last year. I think that was a little. It was high for him, but he still put up the yards. He still has the receivers. He has CeeDee Lamb. He has now Brandon Cooks, who, like you, I think he's a stable guy. He can get 1,000 yards a year. He'll get a few touchdowns, and I think he'll he'll produce for Dak as a good option, and they still have Gallup as a number 3. So he has his targets. He has the guys to go to. He'll put up numbers. He's worth a look. But as an Eagles fan, like I said, I try to avoid the Cowboys.
It's understandable. I get it. Dak Prescott, for your part, Drew, I mean, is he the guy? I think about his rushing upside that kind of seems to have dissipated after the injuries. First few seasons he had that. Now he doesn't. That's why I'm looking at maybe equating him to the Cousins Carr type of dude. Is that your feeling, or do you think he has more value to add than that?
I don't think he has more value to add than that. I think your read is right. I think his days of being a 300-plus yard rusher are gone. They're over. It's been 2 straight years where he hasn't sniffed that. So he was the QB 18 last year. So one thing about Cousins is he's usually in that QB1 conversation. Prescott was nowhere near that last year. He was disappointingly horrible. Do we think he takes a step? I think it makes logical sense on paper when you add Brandon Cooks to the equation. When Michael Gallup is another year removed from that. He did lose Dalton Schultz, who was his one of the security blankets, and replaced him with, I guess, Jake Ferguson is kind of next man up on the depth chart. And then of course they drafted the Michigan rookie in the 2nd round there. But I do worry a little bit about his ability to provide a stable floor. So I think Cousins has that when he's got weapons like Justin Jefferson and the rookie Addison to throw to. I think Cousins probably has a little bit of somehow has a higher floor. I worry about Mike McCarthy, honestly. I think he kind of rode the coattails of Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. I think he's kind of done it with Dak Prescott to a point. And I don't believe that Kellen Moore was the problem down there. I think the Chargers are kind of licking their chops right now, getting a guy in there who knows what he's doing from an offensive perspective. I think it's going to help Herbert, and I think it's a loss for Prescott. So we look at additions and losses, and I think we need to talk about Kellen Moore leaving and giving the play sheet over to McCarthy. So that scares me a little bit for him. So long story short, I think if Prescott falls to me to a point where he's a value when I don't have a quarterback in a 1-quarterback league, sure, why not? He has the ability to be a quarterback one, but he's certainly not somebody I'm going to target.
Boy, you were speaking to my soul with the Mike McCarthy comments. As a Packers fan, I've been worried about that guy. I've been happy to have him out of my life, but I was worried about him for a great many years while he was here. I am curious here. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb sits atop the top of this depth chart here. I don't know that we need to discuss him too much. I do think he falls probably right in line with those Eagles receivers we were talking about earlier, though. I think he's, to me, maybe even above him, but I almost didn't want to say that to you guys. But I am very curious about the wide receiver 2 spot here, especially for fantasy, because it's a big decision. Talking about Michael Gallup, Drew, you mentioned he's coming back. He's another year removed from his injury. Of course, we've seen that take down some guys before, and they can bounce back from it. Brandon Cooks, Joey, as you mentioned, perennial 1,000-yard type of guy. Doesn't matter what team, what quarterback, what anything he goes to. So what's the read on this? Who do we actually want to believe as the true number 2 for fantasy? Joey, would it be Cooks for you, or would you default to Gallup because he's been there?
I would say Cooks. For me, it has to be Cooks just because he's so consistent. And he at his ADP right now, I feel like he's worth taking where he is. I wouldn't reach for him necessarily. I might take him a little bit above where he is now because I think he's a little lower than he should be, just because to me he's got to be the clear number 2 receiver there for Dallas. Gallup is going to be worth a look in best ball leagues for sure. But I would absolutely love to have Cooks on my fantasy team as a flex or wide receiver 2 or 3 on my roster, depending on how your teams are built. But to me, it's not really a competition between those two in my eyes.
I love it. Drew, what do you think about those two? Similar thoughts? Different?
Yes, very much so. I think you nailed it, Joey. I think I'm definitely interested to see what Gallup can do. He made a comment, and I'm using his words, he feels more springy this year than he did last year coming back from his ACL. So I guess he feels like he's 100% back, which definitely intrigues me where he's going from an ADP perspective. But in a vacuum between the two of them, I want Cooks for sure. So, and I think you nailed all the reasons why, Joey.
As a Wisconsin Badger fan, I am contractually obligated to not say anything bad about Jake Ferguson, but I do wonder what the absence of Dalton Schultz will mean for 3 wide receiver sets on this team. And if we can see a healthy dose of all of these guys, that would be my hope, my preference, but I truly don't know. What I know right now is there's one running back on this team that is worth drafting. His name is Tony Pollard. My only question to you guys is how high should he be taken? And look, all the stuff happening with running backs lately, not getting paid, the holdouts, is he worth actually paying what's needed to get him in Dynasty? So two-parter there. But Drew, 1, how high are you taking him in redraft? And 2, what are you giving away for Dynasty?
Well, for redraft, I have him right now, and this is subject to change. Obviously, there's a lot to shake out as camps hitting, but I've got him right now as my RB8. So he's a solid RB1 for me. I have, I'll just go down the list. I have CMC above him. I've got Saquon, Eckler, and Chubb, and Bijan for me are the top 5. And we can argue about the order there. I'm high on Chubb this year, and Ramondre Stevenson. I've done my projections. I'm very confident in a especially with the release of James Robinson. I'm confident in Ramondre is going to outperform Pollard as well. And unless, of course, until, of course, Bill Belichick decides to pick up Fournette or somebody of his ilk and throw him into the mix, which is possible. But as things stand right now, Ramondre to me is grading out as a top 7 running back, along with Jonathan Taylor, of course. So those are all the guys that I'm interested in ahead of Pollard. But that's not a very long list. So to me, he's definitely a legitimate RB1 this year, and that's high praise coming from an Eagles fan.
The highest, I think, that you can possibly get as a running back. And stretching on to that here, Joey, do you feel the same in terms of who you're taking over him? And then what's your long-term outlook for a guy like this?
Yeah, I gotta agree with Drew a lot on there. I think he's a clear RB1 at this point. I mean, there's just no competition for him there in Dallas right now. I think Mike Davis and then Deuce Vaughn are the running backs behind him, and they don't really present much of a threat. I don't think Deuce Vaughn is necessarily going to pan out. He looks like a Darren Sproles, but I don't think he's going to have a Darren Sproles career. Maybe more of a Donnell Pumphrey career where he gets drafted and had those great college numbers and barely, I don't even know if he really made it out at a training camp with us.
He did not.
Yeah, so we'll see what Deuce Vaughn does, but I definitely agree Pollard's a number 1. And long term, I think I don't know if he's long term a running back 1, just because I don't think he can take the beating of a running back, a number 1, a lead back workhorse for a long period of time. He'll be a great pass catcher. 3 wide receiver sets. He can work out of the slot for sure, as they have done with him. He'll put up the numbers. So hopefully in the long term, they can bring someone in who can lighten his load. But for this year, I think he'll handle it well, and he'll put up the numbers as a top 10 for sure running back.
I love it.
Yeah.
But man,
I don't like him as
Ronald Jones erasure, you guys. Jeez, just
sorry,
completely writing off
Ronald
this
Jones.
talent on the depth chart there.
Yeah.
He's Ronald Jones the third, because he's the 3rd best Ronald Jones at running back right now, by the way. People don't know that. Sorry, fantastic. Go ahead, Drew. What were you going to say?
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think the other point, I think you were hitting on this, you kind of danced around a little bit there, Joey, was that I do worry a little bit about from efficiency perspective. I think Pollard was very, very efficient, but he also shared the load with Zeke, who did a lot of heavy lifting, especially in short yard situations. So I do worry about his efficiency and his ability to take a beating over the long haul. I think those are real concerns to bake in, but I think the optimism is definitely warranted. I'm still taking him as an RB1, but I'm not as bullish on him in Dynasty as some might be. I'm still interested, but I'm not going to, mortgage the farm for him.
Yeah, I think everything we've seen lately makes it very hard for me to trust any running back for a big price point in Dynasty right now. It's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. CMC is sort of the last of the guys where, like, look, I'm in win now. I know what I'm getting here. It could be 1 year, but it could be 5. He could be the next Travis Kelce. Anybody outside of that, I am wary about it. So I get it. I respect it. Gentlemen, this has been fantastic first of all. Thank you both so much for coming on. I've enjoyed the hell out of this. Any last words for any of the teams? Anything that we missed that you want to talk about here? Here's your opportunity.
Bye, Dotson.
Let's get the bumper stickers made. Let's fire them up, gentlemen.
No, I think the only thing I'll throw in there, I'm looking at this combing over what did we not talk about? We talk about the Washington backfield, and we talk about the Giants backfield. I think Eric Gray is a name to keep an eye on in case something happens with Barkley and a holdout. I think Chris Rodriguez Jr., I think Kentucky pick. I think he's somebody that could be interesting if something happens in the backfield. So we didn't really talk about J.D. McKissic leaving that backfield in Washington. But he was a pretty big part of the passing game there for years. So that's the only reason why I kind of lean Gibson in PPR in that situation. But Rodriguez profiles more as kind of what Brian Robinson brings to the table. So if something happens to Robinson or he gets hurt, God forbid he gets shot again. That's a horrible thing to say. But anything happens to Brian Robinson, Rodriguez is somebody to definitely keep an eye on. But other than that, I think we hit everything nail on the head for everything. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I mean, we didn't get into an in-depth Jake Ferguson versus Luke Schoonemacher discussion, but I don't know that the people are even ready for that yet. So it's probably best left for another
Best
time.
Ballers are all over the late Ferguson shares. Yes.
They're drooling for it, and I'm going to leave them wanting more. Gentlemen, let's go around here. Please tell the folks where they can find you out on social media, out on Twitter. If you have anything at all that you want to hype up at the moment, please feel free to do so. Joey, where can they find you out in the world?
Sure. Yeah. So I am on Twitter. My handle is @SkyCaptain25. Why am I called Sky Captain? I played Ultimate Frisbee in college and I can jump pretty high. So I was known for patrolling the sky. So that's why I'm called Sky Captain. And I've kept that handle since college. So that explains that. I'm not on any official fantasy podcasts or anything like that. So if anyone's looking for guests just to provide a fan perspective, hit me up. I'm happy to jump on. Jake, I appreciate you having me today. It's been a blast. And if you ever need a Philly fan back on, I'd love to come back on. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
Anytime, Joey. I vouch. Get this man on another podcast. Let him roll through the tunnels here. Talking. You can talk about anything outside of Philly. Look, you were great with talking about the Eagles, but just as good talking about the other teams. So let that ruminate on your resume there. Drew, where can they find you? What do you have? Anything that you want to hype up here?
Before we get to me, double vouch for Joe. He's been a lot of fun in the Pick Six chat and our Scott Fish Bowl. So I'm looking forward to seeing the live draft this year. It's super exciting. It's going to be a lot of fun. So for me, I'm on Twitter also at Drew Delaware. So I'm writing for QB List. So I'll be part of the Sit Start team again this year and doing some other things to keep an eye out for some pretty exciting things we're doing there. So we also do What We Saw, which is breakdowns of every game from a holistic standpoint, mainly with a fantasy focus, but really more of kind of a holistic game perspective, which is pretty awesome. So really proud of the work that our site does there. It's kind of they're the unsung heroes, the people who do the What We Saw there. And I'm also doing a ranker for Fantasy Pros. So last year I was in the top 10 for my draft rankings. Hopefully we'll be able to repeat this year. So, but every week I'll be doing my rankings as always. So you can find me there as well. So thanks a lot for having me on, Jake. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Pleasure all on this side of the screen, my friends. And until next time, keep drinking and talking fantasy football. Cheers, FFers.
Drunk.
I'm drunk. That's not the right segment. Here's the right segment.